To present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations.
This is what hunger looks like. It is not a pretty sight. And while many of us think hunger is a problem only on the African continent, it can also be found here on the streets of the U.S. and here in Austin. Today on Austin Faith Dialogue, we'll discover the role one religious-based organization is playing to alleviate this worldwide problem.
Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs series at the crossroads of religion and life. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues in the area in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Join us now for this week's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
I'm Ruth Landsberg, your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. It's called Bread for the World, a nationally based organization that seeks to mobilize people of faith to work for change in the battle against hunger, not only in the U.S., but throughout the world. Today we'll look at this unique program and specifically at the projects of our local Austin chapter. But first, let's get some background on Bread for the World from producer Roger Lotz.
When the issue is hunger, most people are likely to think about recent volunteer efforts that have attempted to alleviate the situation on the African continent. But hunger is more widespread than just Africa. It's a major problem in the United States as well. If you think hunger is not a problem in the U.S., just take a look at these figures. 1 out of every 5 children in the U.S. lives in poverty. It is estimated by groups like Bread for the World that 5.5 million children under 12 go hungry daily, and that another 6 million children often may not have enough food to eat. While many groups try to make gathering food donations their top priority, Bread for the World takes a different approach. With over 42,000 members and 355 local chapters, Bread for the World's primary mission is to lobby Congress and the current administration to bring about positive legislative changes that will address the root causes of hunger here in the U.S. and abroad. Since its inception in the spring of 1973, the group has lobbied for such programs as African Relief, the Child Survival Fund, Tax Relief for Poor People, Women in Development, and the WIC program, Special Supplemental Food Programs for Women, Infants, and Children. Bread for the World makes an impact in Washington with a religious grassroots campaign nationwide. From letter-writing campaigns to having members call congressional representatives before key votes, the goal of the organization is to make an impact in Washington. And the impact can be quite significant when one looks at the results of the Child Survival Fund.
Well, when we first proposed the legislation, Jim Grant, the director of UNICEF, told me that for every $100 spent on child survival, they estimate that at least one child's life is saved. If you apply that formula to the $100 million that Congress voted for fiscal year 1989, you're talking about 1 million kids who will live rather than die, just from 1 year's funding alone. That's 25 children for every Bread for the World member.
Funding for Bread for the World comes from members' contributions, as well as donations from most Christian denominations. This funds work that includes an organizational newsletter, a telephone informational line so members can keep up to date on the congressional agenda, to educational programs to help organize local chapters. And as Arthur Simon admits, it has just one purpose in mind.
We can raise our voice on behalf of hungry people. And if we do that, we can make a difference. Public policy has an enormous effect in determining whether people eat or die.
Now joining us are 2 people who've dedicated much of their time to Bread for the World and will hopefully be able to describe the work of the local Bread for the World program here in Austin. Pat Ayers has been a member of Bread for the World since 1976. She also serves on the organization's national board. Also joining us is Austin-based attorney Judy Kostura. While being a member of Bread for the World, she is also involved with a group called Austin Harvest. Austin Harvest seeks to redeem foodstuffs from area bakeries and restaurants for local distribution to the needy. We hope to discover some more about that program as well. I'd like to thank you both for joining us. That was a fascinating piece that we got to see on the whole history of this program. How did you first get involved, Pat?
I was invited to attend a retreat sponsored by Bread for the World in the fall of 1976. Some of the members of the staff and people from around our state from various denominations were present, and in that retreat we searched the scriptures to understand the biblical justification and concern for justice as well as for providing for the needs of the poor. We studied the issues that impact hunger, and we studied current legislation and how we could make a difference by the stewardship of our citizenship as well as by the stewardship of our resources and dollars as Christians to impact the hungry people. And I was deeply moved by that whole experience. I had just come from a trip visiting in Bangladesh and in Calcutta, and I was struggling for what to do in my own life to respond to what I had seen. And so I joined Bread and became active, and I've been very active ever since.
And this is a big component of each of the chapters is to study and to worship together.
Yeah, yes, it's a crucial component of the whole organization.
And that's how you first came in touch with it. How did you first get involved, Judy?
When my church sponsored a mission trip to Mexico City, I saw that a lot of people were hungry and wanted to do more to try to find ways to alleviate that hunger on a more long-term basis. A friend of mine, Bob Hendricks, gave me a gift membership to Bread for the World, and I've been a member ever since.
So this is really kind of a different group in many ways from other sorts of hunger organizations. We saw reflected in that piece just a moment ago that it's a very politically oriented group.
That's its exclusive mission, because the churches and many other types of organizations are dedicated to providing direct relief. The mission of Bread for the World is to understand how public policy impacts hungry people and to impact and change that public
policy itself.
So it strictly is a public policy organization, and in conjunction with that, to study and understand the causes of hunger so that you can develop legislation that is appropriate.
Well, how does the public policy really directly affect the sort of hungry children that we've seen in our footage?
Well, if you understand that people who are hungry can't learn very well, they have poor health many times, and they cannot contribute as members of society the way they would like to, then you understand that simple feeding programs, which may help them for a day at a time, don't address some of the longer-term causes of hunger. We've got some basic inequities that need to be addressed, and as citizens, when we learn more about those inequities, what causes them, and what we can do to try to address them, then we not only help people get food for one day at a time through feeding programs, but we help them become more self-sufficient through a broader-based public policy that tries to correct some of the inequities that we've had.
So Bread for the World doesn't work with direct food relief programs in general, does it?
That's correct. Art Simon, who's the former president of Bread for the World and its founding president, likes to say that the solution to hunger walks on 2 feet. One foot needs to be feeding programs or direct relief. And a lot of that is happening through the churches and other private organizations. But the other solution to hunger walks on that second foot, which is trying to change some of the inequitable structures that we have that allow for hunger to be taking place in the first place.
And you're
We're
really
working on that second foot.
Yeah, you're working really on both feet, though, with your
Yes.
other group. Tell us about Austin Harvest just a little bit.
Austin Harvest is a fairly new to Austin organization, but it's part of a national organization called USA Harvest that was started out of Kentucky. We're one of 40 or 50 local chapters, and we simply get food that would otherwise be thrown away at the end of the day from restaurants, bakeries, caterers, hotels, motels, and other places that have prepared food, didn't get to serve it, would throw it away. Instead, they call us at 371 Food, and we send a volunteer to pick up the food and take it directly to Caritas, Austin Baptist Chapel, Foundation for the Homeless, or Salvation Army.
So if you were a local restaurant and you wanted to get involved with this, tell me the phone number again.
371-FOOD.
Okay, 371-FOOD. That sounds like a really clever way to pick up some of the things that are already happening in the community.
It's a great organization. One thing that's unique about it is we have no bank account. We don't ask for money. We don't accept money donations. We want food that typically would be thrown away if it wasn't redeemed by our members. We have about 100 volunteers that are a phone call away from being able to get in their car, go pick up some food, and take it to a feeding site.
I think a lot of people are familiar and comfortable with the idea of this sort of grassroots direct relief. It's something that you see going on in your own church or synagogue, and it's something that you see going on in lots of local groups. But Bread for the World seems to have just such a bigger picture looking at the public policy. Yet it's really satisfying to be part of a soup kitchen, or it's really satisfying to do something that you yourself feel is direct. How do you feel this?
It's satisfying, but it's also very frustrating because you
Yes,
see
yes.
that people are hungry,
That it's
and
limited.
you know that what you do is going
limited.
to help them for the day and hopefully help them with meeting immediate needs.
You see where I'm going, that it's very, I think it's very difficult to reconcile that frustration sometimes. And how do you feel like Bread for the World really addresses that for people's individual faith, for each person, the millions of people who are involved in Bread for the World, who participate in all the different activities? How do you think that addresses their personal faith?
I think that, for instance, Bread for the World recently sponsored a piece of legislation which Congress passed and the President has signed to redefine our approach to relief and development in the Horn of Africa, and where there's so much starvation and hunger, where there's so much war and strife, to redirect our funding from military funding to relief and development funding, to encourage our funding to go to organizations which are coming up from the grassroots in that part of the world, to encourage the United Nations and others to exert pressure to reconcile some of the conflicts in that part of the world, so that where we must continue sending food relief while millions are starving, this legislation also addresses getting at the underlying causes of that starvation and trying to make a long-term difference. And that is very satisfying. I think that if you, like Judy said, if you stay at a soup kitchen and you work and you see the results of cuts in domestic relief programs, when you see that people who would be eligible for food stamps are women and infants and children's program, there's not enough money to give them the help that they need and they're having to come, then you realize that your vote to improve their lot in that way is significant and a more long-term solution than just handing out the cup of soup, which
So
you
it really
also need to do.
It matches both of the needs, and it sort of addresses, in a parallel way, that sense that you quoted from the founder of walking on both feet. It sort of meets both of your needs spiritually in some ways.
Right.
It seems that Bread for the World does a lot of work that's international, and that support that you're looking for is public policy that's going to influence some pretty significant places around the world. We have some information on hotspots around the world that are really devastated by hunger. And tell me a little bit about the programs that Bread for the World is trying to, the agenda that they're trying to move forward in those parts of the world.
Well, as Pat indicated, the offering of letters last year, an offering of letters is simply a topic that Bread for the World selects as its theme for that particular year, along with other pieces of legislation. The offering of letters was on the Horn of Africa and trying to alleviate hunger there by making sure that the food aid that we send and the developmental aid that we send is targeted to programs that really meet the needs of the poorest of the poor, rather than just being programs that help those who are already wealthy get wealthier at the expense sometimes of the indigenous people.
Tell me a little bit more about the offerings of letters.
We work through the churches, we work through the crop walk that is done every year. Individual members of Bread for the World who are active in their local congregations can turn to that congregation and help educate the congregation with Bread for the World materials about the different items of public policy that need to be looked at. Another way we've done that is through the crop walk. Every year, the Christian Rural Overseas Program is what CROP stands for. We have a walk that about 1,200 people participate in to raise money to help internationally, and about 20 or 25% of the funds stays here in the Austin area as well. There are 2 rest stops where we set up tables, and alongside the people who are handing out juice and cookies, we're handing out postcards and information so that people can let
They can be educated as they participate.
as they walk.
So there are a lot of ways, I think, for people to get involved. Certainly, maybe not with the Austin Harvest Group, but monetary donations are pretty important, and as well, of course, as the food donations. But it seems that the money is probably always going to be the key lever to get things going. Do you find that public policy, especially in Washington, for example, I know that you're involved on the national level, do you have a sense that the money's really tightening up on hunger?
Yes, we've been in the past decade or so in an era when funding for relief, for domestic programs that address the issues of poverty and hunger have been very hard to come by. And this year, Bread's offering of letter is called, offerings of letters called Every Fifth Child, and it addresses the needs of the hungry children in the United States.
Tell me what every 5th child refers to.
Well, 1 in every 5 children in the United States is hungry or living in poverty. And so the programs that this offering is targeting is legislation to increase funding for the Supplemental Feeding Program for Women, Infant, and Children, WIC, the Head Start program, and the Job Corps. And of course, in Texas here, we should call it the Every 4th Child offering of letter, because 1 in every 4 children in Texas lives in poverty. But nationwide, 1 in every 5 children is living in poverty at risk of hunger. And these programs are basic programs to meet the needs of our young people as they mature. And they're programs which have been proven as cost efficient and as making a significant impact. And yet there are many, many, many mothers, children who are eligible,
who still can't receive.
The funding is not adequate for them to receive help. So that's our major emphasis for this year, is to support legislation to increase the funding for WIC and for Head Start and for the Job Corps.
And that's really where you see this incredible leverage on a national level of all the different grassroots organizations bringing together all the different letters.
We hope to raise approximately 100,000 letters over the course of the year targeted to this specific topic, so that those people who are eligible for the program can actually be included within the program. For example, for Head Start, only about 28% of the children who are eligible to receive benefits are getting benefits. With WIC, only 55% of the children and mothers who are eligible are receiving benefits. There's simply not enough money to include the other 45 or 72% who are eligible but not receiving the kind of help that they need to help them break out of the cycle of poverty.
I understand that the local groups are all organized around the congressional districts. Is that right?
Yes.
And it occurs to me that probably the groups that are strongest are in communities that may not reflect the greatest need for hunger, such as some of the inner urban areas. Is there a discrepancy between the stronger local groups on a national level and the areas that really need the most attention?
I don't know, but we're hoping that with some of the recent realization across the nation that we've got some serious pockets of inequity and poverty, such as is being brought to light in Los Angeles right now, that people will use their anger, their rage, their frustration, which are all fairly understandable because we certainly haven't met and defeated racism or poverty or other inequalities, that they'll use that frustration and anger in very constructive ways, such as becoming stronger and more active politically, and also realizing that God is an advocate for the poor, God is an advocate for the downtrodden, for the widows and orphans, and that we as individual Christian citizens need to follow that example that was set for us, that is mandated for us in the scriptures, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, and put our advocacy to use in a way that makes this a better world.
So it's a wonderful argument for getting involved.
It really is.
If somebody wants to get involved, how could they reach Bread for the World?
Bread for the World is headquartered in Washington, D.C., and you can write Bread for the World, 802 Rhode Island Avenue Northeast, Washington, D.C., 20018, and ask
we'll
to
put
be
the
a
phone number
member.
up just for...
And the phone number is 202-269-0200. And asked to get information and to join. One of the wonderful things about being a member for Bread for the World is getting in contact with people of common concern. That's how I met Judy when I moved to Austin, and one of the rich experiences I've had moving around has been to find people of common concern. The other thing is that Bread produces excellent background and study materials for you so that you really know about these issues. You write intelligent letters, and Congress is impressed by the letters we write, and they make a difference.
The organization also publishes some of its own educational materials, does it not?
Oh yes, it does all of its research and publications, and we're putting out a book now annually called Hunger 1991-1992, which is a consolidation of all the information worldwide about hunger, that it's an excellent resource for libraries and schools and churches or anyone concerned about hunger. Then we have study programs for all ages and books about public policy and hunger.
So the local groups have seem to strike a balance between studying and worshiping together and also taking action. How does the local Austin group work?
The local Austin group is fairly diverse. We all have jobs or other things that we do during the day, but try to get involved through our churches and other organizations, but also Bread makes it very easy to stay informed. All the members receive a newsletter every month and other targeted mailings throughout the year that help educate us. The problems of hunger can be very overwhelming, and if you start talking about the balance of trade or other very technical issues, it is very easy to feel ignorant and overwhelmed. And Bread makes it much easier to become well enough informed to exercise your Christian citizenship in a dynamic way, and also to know that you have other people you can turn to, like Pat, who's on the national board, who is very willing to make herself available to help other people. And you read the materials, you talk with one another, we get together on an informal basis for seminars or other reviews, and just try to stay in touch with one another and help each other out by going to each other's churches and serving as support to one another as we help educate people about Bread for the World and hunger.
Do you make presentations in churches and such?
Pat did recently to Gethsemane Lutheran.
Yes, we're available to go to anyone who would like to have a presentation about bread or the issues that we're concerned with.
And hopefully that can stir up some new members or some new letter writers.
Right.
Yes.
Do you find that you get a lot of the kids involved? There are a lot of children involved?
Some of the letters that we get during the crop walk by children who write are very poignant. Some of them have had firsthand experiences with friends in their schools who are hungry and they want conditions to be better. We've had some nurses who have written some very touching letters. We don't do as much with the children, but the church has what's called a church covenant program where the whole church can get involved with Bread for the World and get materials directed to the church that can help bring up the kids through Sunday school lessons and other lessons that are targeted to people of any age or background.
So then they have access to these materials and they also have the opportunity to write letters, to learn as a group.
Yes.
Right. For instance, there's a whole children's activity book around this Every Fifth Child offering of letters, which is done for children with games and charts and the kinds of activities that children enjoy doing, which very much brings home to them the reality of the issues.
And then they can grow up very aware.
Right.
Do you feel, we're getting ready to wrap up here, and I'm really curious what you feel, each of you, about how it works. It's something that's probably pretty hard to measure. How well do you think that the group works in its advocacy?
Senator Paul Simon wrote at one point an article in which he said that every letter written on behalf of a hunger was just bound to save the life of a child. And I think that it's terribly important to realize the impact that we as individual citizens have as we write and visit with our Congress people on legislation and the profound impact that legislation has on people all around the world.
It really does work. Well, I have to wrap it up now, but I'd like to thank you both for joining us, Pat Ayers and Judy Kostura of the Austin chapter for Bread for the World. And I'd like to thank our viewers for joining us today, and I'd like to invite you all to join us again next week on the next edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries